Seguridad para Messi. Is that what they say now? Have you taken time off from chasing Lionel around the planet? And I take it you're still in Nashville, are you?
I am still in Nashville, buddy. And yes, I keep following Messi. And yes, the madness continues. And I love the Spanish, by the way. You can give it that Tennessee twang now because Messi obviously created history with his 44th trophy. I'm sure Sam Marsden can add to the history of that. But yes, thanks so much for having me here. Obviously, this is about the Women's World Cup. So very excited to talk about it. Absolutely.
Yeah, we want to talk about the United States. We want to talk about some of the non-European nations that have done well and maybe not so well. I want to start with the United States because on their day, I'm not sure that there's a team that can beat them, but there's a lot going on. There's a lot of baggage. We've already seen that the coach is gone. Kate Margraf is going as well. What's next for the US and what went so wrong at this World Cup, do you think, LME?
Yeah, that's a good question because I think when we think about the USWNT, we have to focus on a few things. Number one, transitioning itself from the previous World Cup and creating a sort of new identity, given the fact that the likes of Megan Rapinoe and Alex Morgan were only getting older and these new stars were coming through. There had to also be a sense of transition and identity. And that was always going to be difficult at a World Cup where, by the way, and I'm sure we'll get to it in a second, and I'm sure Sophie and Sam have already touched on it, but the margin of difference between the great teams, right? The Frances, the USWNT, the Germanys up to this point, et cetera, and everybody else is at its thinner. And that includes the US. And I think Vlad Kondonovsky is a good man. He's dedicated his entire career to not just the progress of the women's game, but the women's game in the US. But I think there was a lot of limitations in the way that he managed this team. Look, make no mistake about it. There were key injuries, of course, not even just during the World Cup, but also leading up to it. Kristen Press wasn't there, Mallory Swanson as well, of course. So this USWNT side really just wasn't fully equipped with everything that they had to come, but there was no excuse. No excuse. I mean, they scored, one goal in that group stages. They really didn't show enough to see what they could have done. And I think that Andonovsky didn't do himself any favors during the tournament when he made some really questionable decisions, especially in that trio up front. Trinity Rodman is fantastic. Sophia Smith is an absolute star. And Alex Morgan, obviously, we know what she's done. But it just didn't work. It just didn't click. And he never really made in-game decisions to make it happen. And when you combine that to the fact that everybody else is just getting better, it's not surprise to me, guys, that the USWNT faltered where they did.
What about the other non-European nations? We've heard the stories from Sam and from Sophie about recycled kits and other tales to do with nations that maybe haven't had the backing from the National Association. What's been the biggest kind of 2 or 3 stories for you for the non-European nations that have been at this World Cup?
Yeah, Mark, I'm glad you asked me that because that's really what I want to focus on a lot here. I think it's really important to remember. And again, I was listening to you guys talk about this before, and it's worth echoing as well. Regarding the margin of difference between everybody else, it's really important to celebrate these nations who, by the way, have to do so much to get here in the first place. Jamaica to become the first Caribbean nation to make it into the playoffs, and their disputes with the federation, the fact that the Bob Marley Foundation had to even, create a GoFundMe as well as a parent of one of the players to even get here in the first place. Nigeria as well facing those kind of situations. But I really want to focus on, me being Peruvian, on the South Americans, Colombia. I mean, I have to tell you that the obstacles that this squad and these women have had to go through for so long continues to not be spoken about, right? We all know, obviously, about the power of the Colombian domestic league, but the Colombian women's side has a lot of support and passion, but from their fan base, not from anybody else. And they've had to fight and fight, specifically during COVID, where it was basically taken down, and only the Colombian men's was the team that was doing it. Anyway, throughout it, all of it, they still continued. They paid for their own travel. They paid for their own training sessions. And the money that they usually get, which is only about $20 a day, whenever they have to represent the country, wasn't happening. So all these things, and the fact that they made it that far to face England and gave them everything they could, is absolutely unbelievable. They have a talented Linda Caicedo, of course. So to me, those are the stories that are worth highlighting. The fact that the women fight 2 games here, the one on the pitch and the one off it. And you always have to, worth mentioning that they're both equally as important. Spain, obviously, being the perfect example. Now they're World Cup champions, but it's really worth celebrating how these non-European nations or US made it so far. And I hope it continues. And I hope there continues to be a support for them, especially Colombia, because anybody celebrating, especially if you're in the federation or whatever, and you're celebrating how far they went, well, I hope that, the actions match your words, because they're definitely worth supporting. Colombia were tremendous in this World Cup.
Yeah, well said, Luis Miguel. Okay, we're going to wrap this up with your final thoughts. And I want to start with Sophie first, because she's seen all these miserable English fans and all these jubilant Spanish fans go by her. I'm just glad that no one's tried anything or asked you to take a pint or something like that. However, Sophie, in years to come, when you look back on your experiences down under at the Women's World Cup, what would be your biggest takeaways, do you think?
If your boss says you should bungee jump for ESPN, you probably shouldn't. A lot of people have seen that video by now. I think I was the people who's worried about the expansion to 32 teams. I thought we were maybe a tournament cycle too soon, but the growth of what's happening around the world. And these players, as Louis pointed out, they just battle and battle and battle. I mean, I think what they could achieve with the backing of their federation. I just think my takeaway is just the growth. We saw some in 2019 that was about getting the fans involved. Now it's about how global women's football is, and even though you've got so many part-time players, conditions are still so poor. So many places in the world. It's that if you can get to these stages, and now you've got more chance to, you can impress. You can make a name for yourself, and you can have countries like we saw with Colombia just fall in love with you. Yeah, positive stuff.
Okay, Sam, what are your takeaways from your time in New Zealand, where thankfully you did not complain about the weather, unlike Mark Ogden? How will you look back on the Women's World Cup in years to come, and how will it be remembered, do you think?
I didn't complain about the weather, but I did cause a minor disturbance with some stuff about Spain being bored in Palmerston North. So that's one thing I'll certainly remember in years to come. Hopefully it spurred them to go on to win the World Cup, and I can take some sort of credit now that it's all passed a little bit. But it was a couple of hectic days when that happened. But yeah, we spoke about it in terms of the surprise and the impact. Of course, echoing what Luis and Sophie have said about how this needs to be a moment to not stand still, to continue, especially like Luis says with the non-European nations, not just to back the national teams, but to back grassroots football in all those countries and to keep investing. Just on the pitch, I guess, to round off, just with Spain as world champions, I guess it could be remembered as sort of a key moment in the changing of the guard in women's football. If they get things right off the pitch now with the generation of players they've got coming through, we could perhaps see them have some sort of dominance similar to what we've seen over the US over the last sort of 8 years. This tournament we've seen, obviously, she's been at Barcelona this past season, but we've seen really sort of on the international stage the breakout of Salma Padaluelo, and there's obviously more players coming through at Barcelona especially who are ready to step up in perhaps the next cycle. Aitana Bonmatí only 25, 26. So perhaps this could be the tournament we look back at and see, Spain, they finally got over their demons in knockout stages, and perhaps that could be a worrying thing for the rest of the world.
And Luis Miguel, you've been on the Messi train, so you've not been in Australia and New Zealand, but I know you've watched a lot of the coverage in the United States. What's your biggest takeaway from what you've seen?
I want to focus on the individual performances a little bit here, Mark. I want to focus on Sophia Smith or, Rebecca Spencer for Jamaica, or Linda Caicedo, and the genius of Aitana Bonmatí. Please, everybody read Sam Marsden's piece on her. You mentioned Messi. Sometimes I feel Messi wishes he could be Aitana Bonmatí. I think every single academy, whether it's men or women, should study this woman. She's an absolute genius on the pitch. She reminds me of Badishnikov, back when he used to dance ballet, like the way she just creates space for herself. Everybody's playing checkers. She's playing three-dimensional chess, and she sees the game 3 seconds before anybody else. She's honestly a genius. I think I want to end it with that and to celebrate and congratulate Spain, a Spanish side that continues to fight the federation, and they're so resilient and heroic, but it all begins and ends with the future Ballon d'Or winner, Aitana Bonmatí. She is absolutely amazing. You know, it's just incredible. So the individual brilliance of this World Cup has really been fantastic to watch.
Thank you very much for watching ESPN FC on YouTube. For more highlights, analysis, and exclusive content, be sure to subscribe.